Okay, so hello everyone. Welcome to the Brewmaster Series, episode 2, I guess, where we're chatting with head brewers from all around Ireland and breaking down one of their signature brews from start to finish. And if you're a home brewer yourself, again, we're going to make the recipe available. You can have a batch of brewing yourself, and the clones will be available to everyone on the website. So looking forward to that. So tonight we have a grand total of 4 brewers joining us, which is absolutely brilliant to see. So we have Dave from Dundalk Bay Brewery joining us, Liam Tutty from Dead Centre, Joe O'Driscoll from Ballykilcavan, and then we have John Allen from Wicklow Wolf joining us at the end as well. He was due to be at our last session. He was unwell at the time, so he's joining at the end of this one, which is great to see. It's fully recovered, so we're all very happy about that. And then that's the order we're going to be tasting the beers in as well. So just so you know, if you heads up at home, we're going to have Haus Party first, moving on to Teeny Tiny, then on to Bambricks, and then finishing up with our Apex Oatmeal Stout. So just a little bit of housekeeping. Obviously, you're all very welcome. It's great to see so many faces. As always, please know these events are entirely audience fueled. Get your questions in, get your comments in throughout. It's absolutely brilliant to see. And we'll do our best to get as many through as many of them as possible as we go through. We've got our 4 beers to get through this evening. So we'll do our best to keep it to about 30 minutes per beer. You can drink as much or as little of it in that time, or none at all if you want. Just so you know, that's the general pace we're going to be moving at. Then afterwards, we'll open up for general group chat and let the madness commence. Our general flow, I suppose, for each chat, so we're going to be welcoming each brewer, hearing a bit about their background, how they got to where they are now. Then we're going to have a quick overview of the beer style and tasting, what we were getting, classic characteristics. Then we're going to break down the beer itself. We're going to start getting real nerdy. We're going to talk about the grain bill, hops, yeast, the process, looking at the mash temperatures, times, boil, hop additions, all that sort of stuff, water profile, and then any final comments from maybe the brewer, any questions, any words of wisdom to anyone who wants to have a stab at brewing it himself. And yeah, that's it. I'm going to welcome Dave in now. I'm going to say hello, Dave. How are things? I'll ask you to unmute yourself while I fiddle around with controls here. And while Dave is getting on board, now's your cue, I suppose. Open up your Haus Party Pilsner, crack it open, get into class, start becoming acquainted with it if you haven't already done so. And yeah, I'm going to say hello, Dave. Thanks a million for joining, and great to see you again.
Yeah, how are you doing? Good to see you. Good to be involved again. Thanks.
No worries at all. No, thanks a million. Thanks for coming back. It's a good sign.
I'm glad you had me after the last time.
Yeah. We won't dwell on that. Right, we'll move on. So, Dave, I'm going to ask you, I suppose, introduce yourself. Tell us a bit about your brewing backstory, I guess, and how you became head brewer at Dundalk Bay.
Yeah, well, I suppose I got into brewing I think it was about 8 years ago. Industry was very, very young. There was only 6 or 8 breweries in the country at the time, and I had an interest and a passion in wine at the time, but we were introduced to kind of craft beers, and I really loved what we were doing, and there was no chance of making wine in Ireland, so craft beer seemed to be the obvious next step. Got to meet the likes of Oliver Hughes from the Porterhouse and Seamus O'Hara, and got to talking about what the industry was like and what it was like to be in it, and just start hassling them all to give me a job until Bo Briscoe gave me a job at the time. I started there and kind of started developing my own beers then after probably only a year or 18 months in there. Had some fun with that. I went on to Trouble Brewing for a couple of years. From there went up to Alltag for a couple of years, and now I find myself here.
Hey, nice, very good. Yeah, so you've been around a few of the breweries anyway, and you've been in the industry for quite a while.
Yeah, it's like, it's, as I said, when I got into it, there was only 6 or 8 breweries. I remember the first RDS I did, I think there was 8 or 10 stands at it, and the following year then it went up to 40 or 50 stands, and it was just mind blowing. But it was great to see, and it's every year kind of, it was doubling and tripling. It was never just 1 or 2 new faces. It was always like 20 or 30 new faces, and everybody that was in it was kind of coming at it with the same passion that I suppose I would have seen in myself getting into the industry. And it was just great to see.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. So I suppose then the beer itself, I've cracked mine open. I'm very, very much enjoying it. As usual, I'll ask people, let us know how you're getting on with this. Tell us in the comments. This is something just I love. I'd love to have this on tap. I think it's absolutely gorgeous beer. So I suppose, well, tell us a bit about it. What's the style itself?
But it's a pilsner, but at the same time, like any of the homebrewers who, if you're true to style, it's probably, you might think it's not a pilsner with the addition of the Vienna malt and citra hops. It's along the lines of same way we call our IPA an Irish IPA, and I made that point before of it's a mix of, I suppose, different styles with our interpretation on it. So this has a little bit of Vienna in there to just bring up that grainy character, a bit of biscuity character to add to it, but also just throw a little twist on it, and a little bit of citra at the end just gives it a bit of a, I suppose, a citrusy kick where your traditional kind of German or Czech styles wouldn't have. It is definitely towards the German style pilsner, of being lighter in color, higher in bitterness. Yeah, it's definitely higher in bitterness and lower in color, but that little citrusy twist then at the end of it is just put our own little stamp on it.
Okay, perfect, brilliant. So I suppose we'll just jump straight into the recipe then. So I'm going to share it up on screen here, and we'll get going. I'll just make this full screen. So we'll touch on it. So we have the kind of the basics there. We can see Dave, it's looking at 23 litre batch. We're going kind of 1046 original gravity down to 1010, looking at 4.9%, and the IBU is about 37 and a half, in around that. So that's that kind of that more, I suppose, assertive bitterness you were saying, kind of like the German style. Yeah,
a Czech style, you'd always be kind of a little bit darker in colour and lower in bitterness, and that'll give you more, I suppose, perceived sweetness through both the flavour and the smaller bitterness. It is, to me, it's assertive in its bitterness, but I like that. And then like low colour and just easy drinking. It's crisp, it's refreshing, but it's got a little bit of character to it in itself.
Okay, nice. So then you touch on it, kind of the grain bill. Then you've got a kind of a mix of the German Pilsner and Vienna in there. What's the purpose of let's just say the Vienna malt being in
it? The Vienna is, like, it does add a little bit of colour, but not very much. Now I'm drinking mine straight from the can at the moment. But if you do have it in a glass, I don't have a glass to hand. It's probably a shade darker than some of your traditional German pilsners, but it just adds a little bit of depth. With going for the higher bitterness, you just want a little bit more than just the grainy. Like, the grainy flavors in themselves can be quite assertive. So it just kind of rounds out a little bit of that grainy flavor to carry that bitterness, extra bitterness then. Okay,
nice, very good. So then I suppose moving on to our hops then, we've got two different varieties in there. Like, so what's the purpose of them then? What are they contributing to the beer?
Pearl is kind of the traditional. I will add as well, and I said it to Liam and Brian before I started this, that this beer or this recipe was never my own. It was kind of, when I came in, it was here, but it was definitely one of the beers that we tried and we tested, and we said that we didn't need to adjust. But I have been talking to the guys who were here. It was actually a German student who was here for a couple of months and came up with this beer and put it into production. The Pearl is kind of keeping with that noble German tradition to try and matching it in with the German Pilsner. And then, as I said, the Citra is just a small little citrus kick at the end of it, just to freshen it up, brighten it up, and put our own little twist on it. By all means, to the brew by style brewer, they may not classify this as a pilsner, a traditional pilsner, and that's why, again, it's branded as an Irish pilsner, to say we're not trying to claim it's a traditional pilsner. We're putting our own little twist on it.
Okay, nice, very good. And then in terms of your yeast, then see Saf lager, the kind of 3470, so that's pretty standard lager yeast.
Yeah, it's pretty standard lager yeast, and particularly in homebrewing, where people mightn't have the fermentation control that we would have here in the brewery. 3470 is a bit of a workhorse. Now our fermentation profile would be starting off very low and raising the high. But if you don't have the, I suppose, the temperature control, 3470, I have seen it before. It can work at 16, 17, 18 degrees, not give you any off flavors, whereas other yeast strains will. So if you're looking to brew a homebrew lager, I think it's the go-to choice. It's the one with the most forgiveness.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a forgiving yeast then for the home brewers. Okay, so we'll move on to the process then, Dave. We'll say it's the start of a brew day. You're getting set up. What are you doing basically? How would you kick off a brew day?
Yeah, brew day is pretty simple. And it's when you look at it there, I know there's not a lot of information, but it's a fairly straightforward and easy kind of recipe to run through. Mash profile 64 degrees for 60 minutes. Now we would do because of the low levels of calcium in the mash, you mightn't get the pH dropped that you want. So there may or may not be a need for a pH adjustment just to get you down to around that 5.2 in the mash. We rest at 64 for 60 minutes. Now we have the advantage of being able to bring up our mash steps. So we bring up to 72 degrees for alpha amylase rest. Keep there for 5 to 10 minutes. Do a iodine test. Just again making sure that you're converting all that starch. And if it's not, give another 5 minutes. Test again. And then just for mashing out 76 degrees. That again, that's really to help your lautering. The higher temperatures, the viscosity of the wort, then you get an easier runoff and everything like that. So sparge liquor, we don't tend to, and I know on some homebrew scales they may or may not acidify sparge liquor. We don't. Most of our water in the brewing here is RO, but we've never really had any kind of hold ups in the lauter. So if it's a case that you think, or through your own experience with your system, that a slight acidification of the sparge volume or sparge liquor is needed, go with what you have tried and tested. And then it's a straight up 60-minute boil. Halter pearl, 60 minutes. Added at 60 minutes, we add Saccharomyces, yeast nutrients in most of our brews. That's because we're collecting yeast again, so we want the healthiest yeast in fermentation to pull it back out again. Findings, and then as I say, just a dose of citra in the whirlpool. That's literally just that small little at the end of that. Bitter bite at the end of the beer, you do get a little bit of a citrusy kind of finish on it, if for want of a better phrase.
Yeah, definitely. In terms of the whirlpool, then what sort of time and what sort of temperature are you looking at?
We don't play around with anything in terms of bringing down our temperature in the whirlpool, and that's why there's the IBUs for the citra in the whirlpool. Because we know we're whirlpooling at between 98 and 100 degrees. So you are getting the utilization. If you wanted to bring it down, by all means, bring it down, and you get a little bit more of that citrusy character, but you would have to think then that you're also getting a little bit less bitterness. So if you're going that way, I'd bring up the bitterness then at the start of the brew if you wanted to maintain it.
And then comes down to pitching the yeast. Then, what sort of temperature are you looking at?
We tend to cast down about 13 degrees. Ferment for the first 4 days about 12 degrees, and then allow it to free rise. We set our tank to about 17. It generally would only come up to between 14 or 15 to 16. And once we're at the stagnant temperature or stagnant gravity for 2 days or 1 day, we'll give another 24 hours at diacetyl rest, and then we step crash it. Again, step crashing is a facility we have here that not everybody will have. But if you're not happy to step crash, give 2 days of diacetyl rest. You're not going to do much harm at 16 degrees, and then just cool the whole thing right down.
When you're step crashing, then over what would you be talking about? What sort of temperature drop per day, or how do you do it?
We try to do kind of 2 degrees every 8 hours. So again, facilities we have here, I have access to the brew house here on the phone. I can manage tank farm from the phone. So it's not a huge issue. We'll always make sure that there's somebody here and if there's not somebody here and you're sitting at home, you can just log on and throw it down 2 degrees every 8 hours. It's not always every 8 hours, because when it comes up, that's the next step is at 4 o'clock in the morning. There's nobody biting that bullet, you know. So yeah, it's but it's as close to it as we can.
Then I suppose looking at your water profile, then like are you working off RO water in the brewery and then kind of adjusting it?
Yeah, we've RO water, and then we're adjusting. There's very little, and Pilsen are, you know, the Pilsen water profile is known for being the softest water profile almost in the world, and it was always kind of famed that's why they made the best lagers in the world. So there is always very, very little, and there's a little bit of calcium for the yeast for alkylation and for the mash, magnesium for yeast health. And then your calcium and your chloride is really just for your balance of your malt and your bitterness. So yeah, it's as clean as clear as you can get it. If you're home brewing and you're working off tap water and you can get access to distilled water or raw water, sometimes even diluting it down, kind of 3/4 distilled water to, you know, quarter your tap water, you'll almost land in the target profile then of where you want to be.
Yeah, it seems like I know in on paper it seems like a very simple brew, but like we know lagers are extremely complicated, or they're I suppose more advanced to brew for a home brewer without the kind of required or necessary equipment.
Well, on paper it looks very, very simple, you know, and that's the thing, you know, when you look at some of the big imperial stouts that you can do or the IPAs that you can do, and they look very complicated on paper, but then when you run them through, there's an awful lot less stumbling blocks than when the lager. But then you look at a lager on a piece of paper and you go, "Geez, that looks like a piece of piss," you know. But it's managing your fermentation, managing it the whole way through the process, and it's a babysitting process. It's a 5 to 6 week beer rather than a 10 to 14 day beer, you know. And each stage in it is crucial. You know, you've nowhere to hide because there's so much less flavor, I suppose. Now, not that there's no flavor, but there's less flavor in comparison to those bigger and stronger beers, or, you know, a really, really hoppy beer. But it's less places to hide then. So if something technically goes wrong, it's found out much, much quicker. Yeah,
absolutely. As I said, nowhere to hide with it. It's a more kind of, I suppose, clean tasting beer compared to something that's loaded with hops or different style, I suppose. Then I'm thinking, so I'm gonna invite any questions. Any questions, folks, get in the chat box. As we're doing that, I'm just going to say, would you have any advice to anyone at home, I suppose, who wants to start brewing a lager? What sort of tips would you give them, or where should they start?
Yeah, I'd literally just start with keeping it as simple as you can, and even if you want to brew some of the more interesting lagers, like your dark lagers or your dunkels and stuff like that, start off with something as basic as you can. You know, light lager, simple noble hops, and just from there you're going to taste where are the technical flaws and work on them before you start getting into covering them over with flavors and covering them over with a bit of character that you're not going to get. So start at the very, very basic before you try and complicate anything.
Okay, nice. And then when it comes down to fermentation control, kind of temperature control, you were saying the soft lager gives you a bit of grace there.
Yeah, and that's why I kind of put that yeast in for the homebrew recipe, because it's much more forgiving, you know, and it definitely is. You know, you can make steam beers with it at 20 degrees. You won't get any kind of lager yeast off flavors, you know. So by all means start with that, and once you know you're on the right track, then go into the harder to manage yeast strains and stuff, but just get the basics right first. So start there.
Okay, nice one, amazing. Dave, I know you were due to be off this evening, but you got called in, and you're probably managing the brew house from your phone at the moment, are you?
I'm on Zoom on the phone. I have the brew house on the laptop here.
Yeah. I know you're in the middle of a shift and you're an absolute, I suppose, gent and saying trooper for coming on and jumping on while you're in the middle of your shift. So thank you so much. We'll start to wrap it up there, I think. So yeah, I'm just gonna say big thanks, Dave. Massive appreciation for you coming on. Thanks a million for providing the recipe. It's a lovely beer. It's something I'm definitely going to be trying myself and having it on tap because it's just something I love to drink. So yeah, fair play and thanks again.
Yeah, no worries. Sorry, I had intended to hang around for the night. Unfortunately, that didn't work out. So enjoy the rest of the evening.
No worries at all. Thanks a million, Dave. Thanks again. Chat to you soon.
All right. Cheers.
Good luck.
Bye.
Yeah, okay, right. So we're going to jump across. We're going to go to Athlone next. We're going to welcome in Liam, a stranger to these events. How are you getting on, Liam? Can you unmute yourself?
Should be sorted there, I think.
Yeah, happy days. How are things?
Good. Yeah, good. We just spoke to a brewer who really knows what he's doing, so I'm about to look foolish.
Not at all. The founder and former head brewer of Dead Centre, I suppose we could say.
In fairness, I haven't brewed in a long time, so if Roger was here, he would school you, but Roger isn't available tonight, so you get this guy. Nice.
Okay, right. I'm going to grab my Teeny Tiny out of the fridge. We've gone from, I suppose, one end of the spectrum to the other. We're talking about a very kind of clean taste and profiles with the lager. We're going to go to something that's, I suppose I said, the other end of the spectrum now. Yeah, so grab your Teeny Tinies. I'm going to grab mine. While I'm doing that, Liam, why don't you say hello, introduce yourself, I suppose, and tell us how you got to where you are now.
I'm very well prepared, so I don't mind here. My name is Liam Tutty. I own Dead Centre Brewing here in Athlone. As I mentioned, Roger Rotherrow is our head brewer here. He's the man with the know-how, but unfortunately he has a previous engagement for tonight, so he's not able to be around. I'm in the brewery. It is not at all like the brewery that Dave described to you. We have a 500 litre kit that we normally manage to get around 670 litres to tank. We have 10 head fermenters, 4 of them behind me, and then we have a little fun pilot kit over in this corner here. So we have our Christmas ale, the Belgian dark ale in there, and we also have a peanut butter whiskey stout in one of those tanks. And the other FEs, it's all dark beer actually at the moment. I just realised that earlier on. We have a dry Irish stout, a red ale, an American brown, and a milk stout in the main fermenters. But it's a very manual brewery. We recently upgraded the temperature control, so we can now control the temperatures remotely. So if we need to set a cold crash from home, we can do that. But I pretty much live in here, so normally if there's something that needs doing, I can just pop in and do it. Yeah, the beer itself, Teeny Tiny. It's a very low ABV New England IPA. It was originally brewed for our first birthday here. We brewed 2 special beers, one very high ABV and one very low. The high ABV was a Russian Imperial Stout, and this was the other beer. It was not a whole lot different to what we're going to drink tonight, to be honest with you. We've done something a little bit unusual with the addition of honey malt into this beer. But other than that, the difference between this and what we brewed that first batch is a little more oat and a little more hop. And that's pretty much it. The process stayed the same.
Nice. Yeah. As usual, I'll ask people how they're getting on with this. They poured it, tasted it. Are they enjoying it? I just had my first sip there, and it's just absolutely superb. Gorgeous beer. Such an easy drinker. So packed full of flavour as well. It's beautiful stuff. I suppose, Liam, then obviously you said you brewed it as a birthday beer. You kept it on as part of the core range now. What do you like so much about it? Like, why did you decide to keep brewing this beer?
Well, I'm an unreserved, unashamed hophead. Like I love hoppy beers. They're my go-to. You might know it from the array of stuff that we have on at the minute. But Roger is great at that. Roger brews a very wide range of beers, and I think when we brewed the second batch of this, and I was so happy with it, I probably would have been relatively happy to keep brewing different versions of this same beer. But for me, this is my go-to beer. When I go home, I'll crack open Teeny Tiny 4 or 5 nights a week. It's just You know, it's low ABV without being thin. I think we've done a decent job with filling the body out. And there's just something very easy drinking, very enjoyable about it. It's just a beer that I love, and I think, well, I suppose it's easy to say, I think I love this beer regardless of who brewed it, but we'll never know because we brewed it. But I do love it. It's just my go-to. We don't get it. A lot of places around Athlone won't take this beer because it's cloudy. It's New England. They tend to take the pale ale, which is a little bit clearer, a little bit more accessible maybe, which is frustrating when you want to go out and have a few drinks somewhere. It's just not a style that publicans tend to carry. But I'd gladly drink it anywhere, to be honest. It's just a favourite. I'm so glad you picked this beer, to be honest with you.
Yeah, no, I think it's such an interesting one to include. I couldn't not, to be honest. And the low ABV on it, it's jam full of flavour, and it's a perfect session beer as well. You can have it all evening, like absolutely gorgeous. So we're going to jump into the recipe now. We're going to get stuck into it. Just a couple of comments. Joey saying great mouthfeel for a micro IPA. I think that's one of the big things about it. Like the mouthfeel is fantastic, and a couple of questions about that. So we're going to jump in. We're going to jump into the mouthfeel of it. And Chris is saying I'm in favour of lower ABV, and I like the aroma on the nose. It's one you want to keep going back to. So very nice.
Exactly. That's the whole idea of it, is that it's a drink. You know.
Okay, right. Let's jump into this. We're going to go. Let's get this up and running. How's that looking? All okay?
Yeah.
Cool. Happy days. Okay, right. So just running through the basics. I suppose I'll give a quick overview. I don't know if you can see it okay, Liam. We went for fairly standard. We're trying to standardize these. Going to have 23 litre batch. Your OG original gravity is at 1035. So again, it's quite a low starting gravity, I suppose. And then your final gravity is 1010. Finished it out at 3.3%. Around 35 IBUs. Tricky with this sort of beer style as well, the way with the trying to gauge the IBUs, a lot of late hop additions, but it's
strange one, because when I sent you back the information, we don't track IBUs. We don't. If you look at any of our Untapped, for example, some of them will have IBUs, but we haven't added IBUs to anything because I don't know. The more you look at IBUs, the more it feels like a bit of a myth. To be honest with you, like somebody will say to you, "This beer is 6 IBUs," it'll feel way higher. And another person will say it's 99 IBU, it's going to lift your head off, and you don't notice it at all. So I don't know, it's just not something that we really track. Obviously, we do use BeerSmith. I know Dave said we use BeerSmith, so it does spit out an IBU number. It's just not something that we ever list on the beers, on the packaging, on the website, or anything.
Okay, yeah, nice. It's mad the variants you can get as well. I like from different software using the same recipe and all stuff. So yeah, it's a hard one to track. So right, jumping into the grain bill, then you kind of touched on this quickly already, but so what are we looking at here? There's a nice mix here, and this adds quite a lot to the mouthfeel. Yeah,
so the original, I've actually pulled the brew logs from the batch that we made for the birthday here, and it's not that different really. So the original batch was 55.8% pale malt, 25.4% wheat, 15.2% flaked oats, and 3.6% honey malt. So you can see that the change is really, we've extracted some of the pale malt and put that in as flaked oats instead. For a couple of reasons. Mouthfeel was probably one of them. I do think if anyone was here for our first birthday party when we poured it, it probably was on the thinner side. I don't think it was watery, but it was thinner than I would have liked it to have been. And also the haze, to be honest with you, wasn't. And I know it seems stupid to chase haze, but we didn't quite get the amount of protein in that beer that I would have wanted. It carried a haze, but I don't know if it was exactly the look that we were going for. And so that's the only change. The honey malt is an unusual one. And Roger really did a lot with this beer to try and lean into that juicy element. So he wanted it sweet without a whole ton of unfermented sugar. So he went for the honey malt to try and introduce some sweetness there, which I think has really worked. I'd never used honey malt before. And I suppose the one thing the honey malt does is it darkens the beer. If you take out that honey malt and you just have your pale oats and wheat, you'll probably have a lot of colour. Now, it's a relatively small amount of the grist, but it does give it a slightly copperish colour. And I always worry about things like that. We put a lot of melanoidin malt into another New England IPA, and you do always worry that people will just pour it and go, it's oxidized, without having tried the product, which has happened, I can guarantee you. But no, I think the honey malt here, it doesn't make it a rusty brown colour. It definitely imparts some colour, but I think the flavour benefits are they're outweighed by that.
Okay, then hops. I was just looking at the can there. Yeah, you do have it on the side of the can. So we've got 3. We're going with Citra, Eldorado, Idaho 7.
3 great hops. And 3 great hops that we hadn't used in tandem before until we did the batch year. And so when we scaled it up, we didn't change a thing. We increased the quantities on the last dry hop. So it had been, it was on the first dry hop, rather. And it had been about half of that on the first dry hop. So we doubled it up and then matched that with the last dry hop. So it's it's not a ridiculous, 25 grams a litre kind of dry hop. Roger's actually a very big fan of them. And the more he plays around with it, the more I think he could well be right, is this point of diminishing returns. So Roger really thinks that, after 8 grams a litre, it starts to drop off a cliff. And after 12 grams a litre, you're really having to add an awful lot of hop to produce the same as you did earlier on. So we're not we don't use a phenomenal amount of hops in any of the beer, even Teeny Tiny. So I think it's in a 23 litre batch, 228 grams is very modest.
Absolutely, yeah. It actually, when I saw it initially, there's a lot in there, but I was actually a bit surprised. I thought you would have had a lot higher usage, I think, for
absolutely. Like I've done homebrews, twice the scale that have, 1.5 kilos of hop in there. Now that's probably just taken. But it's 228 grams in a batch that size can give you some proper results, And I think that's again, I think there's probably a lot of homebrewers that are reading these, 20, 21, 22 grams a litre and working out, Jesus, I need to put in an awful lot of hop. I don't necessarily think that's true. So there's a great white paper online about the point of diminishing return for hop additions. It's worth a read. I haven't read it, but Roger has read it. It's I have to say, it seems to be proven pretty accurate for us. Between this beer, we have a new extra pale called Common Element on tap here at the moment. It's in can around the country as well. And it's a relatively similar hopping rate, Talus and Citra. And they do shine through with that quantity. You might think they wouldn't, but they do.
Okay, nice. And then I suppose it obviously comes down to the technique and how you actually utilize the hops as well. So that kind of brings us nicely, I suppose, into the additions here. So you're looking at kind of three additions: one 20 minutes, one dry hop for 6 days, and one dry hop for 3 days.
And sorry, by the way, I noticed you mentioned in one of your emails to me, Rick, when I was searching for the link tonight, that's a 20-minute whirlpool. So technically, from a homebrewer's point of view, that's flame out. So we don't hop during the boil for this beer, but we do. We actually do a half-hour whirlpool, but again, slightly different to what Dave spoke about. We chill the wort for whirlpool. So we'll come out the bottom of the kettle through the heat exchanger back in the whirlpool inlet, and we want to get the beer we generally whirlpool between 75 and 80. So above 75, just that if there's anything nasty on the hops that shouldn't be there, it'll still sanitize the hops, but you won't quite get the level of bitterness I summarised there of the hops you're adding for whirlpool. So this one, for example, is generally whirlpool at 78 degrees. Kind of restrains the amount of bitterness you want to get, makes it that a little bit softer. So sorry, that 20-minute is actually 20-minute in the whirlpool.
Okay, nice. That makes way more sense now. Happy days.
I saw you mention it, and I only spotted it tonight. So sorry.
No worries, no worries. Okay, Grant. So then the hops themselves, so you're going 20-minute whirlpool, then the two separate dry hop additions. What are each of those additions doing for the beer?
Well, we tend to dry hop 6 days out. It's not so much, it will still be active. It won't be a high poison or anything like that. And I understand that there's a lot of people that like to dry hop at high poison and to try and achieve those biotransformations to get a stable haze and as thick a haze as possible, which is fine. I'm actually just looking back here at the temperature readings. If we hit 3.3% on this in 6 days, so when we added the dry hop, it had very, very nearly gotten to finishing gravity. So it was still doing a little bit. We'll add in those hops so that if there is any hop creep, it'll run on and take care of itself in the tank. But yeah, no, the additions there are generally just to try and squeeze out as much aroma as we can. They're all really aromatic hops, and I'm a big fan of all of them. Idaho 7 really jumped the list for me. I love Idaho 7, and I think everybody in the world loves Citra. I haven't met somebody who said I'm just not a fan of Citra. So look, they're New World hops. So very, very aromatic hops. We want to get as much of that out as possible. And some of that we feel could be lost in blow off if it's still really actively fermenting. And so that's something that we tend not to do as much. We could sponge. Technically, we have the ability here to add in a dry hop addition, close up the valve, and let it carbonate naturally. As I said, we're a tiny, tiny brewery. We don't have the ability to measure the carbonation levels in the beer. So for us, spunding, although it would lock in, it would stop the aroma from leaving the tank. It also makes it relatively difficult for us to judge exactly how many volts of carbon we have in the beer. We can judge it by pressure and obviously by taste, but we'd like to be a little bit more scientific than that. Normally we add carbon to a flow meter. We know exactly how much carbon is going in, and it's much more measured.
Okay, nice, very good. Then moving on to our yeast, then so we're looking at the Lallemand, the New England yeast. So that's what's that bringing to the beer? What does that provide?
It's literally just a very low flocculated yeast, and it does. It's said that it provides lots of fruity esters, and to me, the hops are going to add those fruity characters anyway. So it's no harm, but I don't think it's essential either. To be honest with you, the next batch, we have a batch of this in tank under contract in 12 acres in Niche at the moment. And we've decided to change the yeast on it on this last batch. So the beer that you're drinking now is on the Lallemand New England. We've decided to give a shot to Wicklow Hop Company WHC Saturate, which is a new New England strain that they have. I'm interested to see most of our other beers here, to be honest with you, are on WHC strains. We use Old English in Marooned, we use Blacks in Seek the Sunshine. Our Dead Pixels is on 24/7, it's not a WHC strain. But we use a lot of WHC yeast. So with Saturate, we said we can give it a bash. So I'm interested to see how the next batch comes out. But for this, the Lallemand New England, it's a very predictable yeast. It does exactly, and I mean that exactly what it says on the tin. It will give you 100% what it says it's going to do. And to be honest with you, it's one thing that I'll say about some yeast strains, there's very little lag on the Lallemand. It will start quick. Homebrewers is probably not a huge difference, but for us, without sounding like an accountant, the sooner we get the tank emptied, the sooner we can refill it with something else. So it's good for us to be able to see, fermentation kick off 12 or 16 hours earlier than normally would. So.
Yeah, and you're not sweating either, thinking, is it going to kick off?
I do that all the time. In our experience here, the WHC yeast do take a little bit longer to kick off. And yeah, every time I come in the next day, every day, and go, oh shit. But there's never been an issue, it's just lag.
Okay, then. So on to brew day. Then we're starting at the start of the day. We're mashing in. What are we doing? How do we kick things off?
We're pretty much doing things very easily. We have, well, I suppose from a very, very basic, absolute starting point. The HLT is behind me here. We heat it overnight. So we turn the elements on the night before, so the strike water is ready when we come in. Heat our strike water to around about 77. That's mainly what we do. Is we then we pump strike water around the mash to take the chill out of the steel, so it heats up the tun a little bit. And from there, to be honest with you, it's a relatively straightforward single infusion mash. By the time the liquid goes in, the strike water goes in around 71 degrees, and with the combination of the steel and then the malt at ambient temperature drags that down. So we aim for a 67-degree mash. It's mashed for 90 minutes, which is probably a little bit unusual for an ale. But we mash it for 90 minutes, and then we sparge. Sparge temperature is high enough, and that's, you know, pretty basic. We don't do anything out of the ordinary with the beer, to be honest with you. I don't really feel it needs it.
Yeah, absolutely. Then, so you sparge, looking at a 60-minute boil, and so then, as we touched on earlier, so there's no hops are going in during the boil at all in this. It's all post boil.
Exactly. Yeah. Now again, we have the luxury, I suppose, of being able to take the wort out in the kettle through the plate chiller and back into the kettle, which some people may not have at home. So again, it depends on your own setup as to how you want to tackle that. We feel that, as Dave said, he's probably whirlpooling 96 to 98 degrees, or I can't remember exactly what he said, but I imagine somewhere in that region. I think that would summarize a bit too much bitterness out of the whirlpool hops for this beer, which wouldn't technically be wrong and could actually turn out pretty well. It just wasn't what we're aiming for with this beer. So if it's possible when you brew it at home, I would try and get the whirlpool temperature down. Again, keep it above 75 because that's out of the danger zone, but as low as possible or close to it would be good, I think.
Sure. So aiming for somewhere between 75 and 80, try and get somewhere.
As I said, we generally do it at 76, 77, somewhere around there.
Perfect. Yeah, spot on. Very good. Then we're cooled, pitching the yeast. So we've got our New England yeast going in at 19 degrees. Did you let it ride up at all, or did you keep it at 19?
Oh, sorry, I'm going to read you the exact temperatures actually. We tend to keep it, relatively straightforward. So yeast on this one was pitched 18.2 degrees was the pitch, and it rose to 19, and the temperatures were, over the course of kind of a week and a half, 19, 18.4, 18.7, 19, 18.5. It doesn't really, until the cold crash, it's always held around that. It doesn't do anything majorly interesting, to be honest with you.
And you said it's fairly quick, about 6 days down to final gravity. Yeah,
I suppose. Well, we find everything on the bigger scale, and this is not a big scale compared to some people who are going to talk to us tonight. I'm sure John Allen will tell you everything about their big tanks. But like these guys, fermentation gets done in our experience twice as quick as it does on a homebrew scale. And I know we're lucky here. Like we have obviously really good temperature control on the tanks. We actually have climate control in the brewery as well. So the brewery now is sitting at an ambient 16.6 degrees and kind of stays in that region. Never really gets above 18, which is good, I suppose, for the temperature control of the tanks. But it also makes a cold crash nice and easy, I have to say. So we're looking at that too,
Then looking at our water profile, I suppose, so we saw Dave's water earlier, it was like nothing in it, basically. It was the softest water used. Yeah.
Holy moly. Look, I'm going to start by saying, because compared to Dave's water profile, it's like the lottery numbers or something. It's like raw. Dave has the benefit of overall. We don't. So we're operating here, believe it or not, without even a carbon filter. We operate straight off mains water. Obviously, we'd like to do more, but we're very restricted in the amount of room that we have here to get certain things on. But we operate straight off with a 1,200 litre cold liquor tank, and that's just constantly filled with mains water. As we use it, the mains tops it up again. And so you'll notice that most of our beers have a lot going on in the additions to get them where it needs to be, because the water that we're taking in isn't a blank canvas, you know.
Absolutely, yeah. So in terms of the additions on this, what struck me is obviously, so you're looking at there's a lot of calcium chloride going in, but you're looking at your chloride to sulfate ratio is kind of about 2-to-1, which is kind of, I suppose, common for the style, I guess.
Yeah, 2-to-1 tends to be where we'd like to be. 2-to-1, 125 to 260 is probably a little bit north of where ideally we'd like it to be. I think ideally, 200 parts per million chloride, 100 parts per million sulfate is probably it's a touch north of that. But look, it seems to work fine. We haven't had any problems with it. When we send it from here to Paddy in 12 acres to be brewed, he replicates the same profile, even though he's using relatively pure well water. His water profile, his base water profile, and ours are night and day. But we're able to recreate the water relatively well. So it seems to work out okay. I suppose the benefit of having the chloride on the higher side is that does tend to lend to kind of that pillowy, soft, it's quite New England-esque, which probably helps us as well. At 3.3, you do run the risk of thin. So I think between the oats and the chloride additions, it probably helps a little bit,
Yeah, I think on the beer, that's pretty much it. I see the target mash pH about 5.3 as well. It's again kind of bang on style.
Yeah, we do here. We do adjust that ever so slightly with some acid, just a tiny bit. And I think if it was let go itself, we'd probably hit kind of a 5.5, which is just a little too acidic.
Yeah, teeny tiny bit of acid.
Teeny tiny bit of acid.
Oh, good. Right. So then I suppose let's say someone at home wanted to brew this themselves, kind of words of wisdom before we get into our questions. I'm going to jump back to them. But what would you have any, suppose, kind of, wise words for someone who's going to have a stab at it?
I have to say, I think it's probably because myself and Roger both come from homebrew backgrounds. Roger is obviously, has qualifications now that I don't have. But I think we tend to take everything as a kind of without being lazy, but what is the most straightforward way to get to where we need to be? So everything seems to be, we tend to do relatively straightforward things. As I said, single infusion mash, 67-degree mash isn't a million miles off what most people are going to do already. Hour-long boil. There are very few things that we benefit from on the commercial scale that we're at, because it is a very small commercial scale that people at home can't do. I think probably the only thing in this beer that you couldn't go out and do straight away tomorrow might be to control the temperature of the water. And I could be wrong. Maybe 90% of the people here might say that's easy done. That's no problem. And other than that, it is a straightforward beer. Like, we're not trying to, we're not trying to turn the world upside down here. We're trying to do something that's, forgive me, but like relatively straightforward and do it well. That's kind of what tends to be the approach we take with everything. I don't know if we need to rewrite all the rules to do things pretty well. That's, it's a simplistic beer. It's not a very complicated beer.
Yeah, it's a pretty good mantra to have as well. Keep it simple. I like the KISS methodology.
Yeah,
keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah.
So yes, I suppose jump to some comments and questions here. So Richard was saying, I find some IPAs are great at hiding the alcohol, but this one has done a disappearing act, and it stands up against other 6%ers. So that's very.
I think there's lots of things, like even on the CO2 as well. Not crazy carbonated, nice and light, tends to lean into that kind of juicy character again, without being without feeling overly carbonated. There are lots of little things you can do to make it lean in that kind of, is this a soft drink or is it getting me where I need to be? That kind of way.
Yeah, absolutely. And that leads nicely into the next question from Will then. He said, what's the secret to the mouthfeel? And I know you kind of touched on this a couple of times throughout. It's like a combination of a few different things going on.
Yeah, there's probably a couple of different things. I think the oats really improves it. We generally mash, a half a degree higher, say, than the 67, so slightly lower. And I do think, the gypsum in there helps us out, the water profile helps us out as well. So it's there's a couple of different things going on. It's I don't know. You've called it a comedy of errors, I suppose. It all just kind of came together.
Yeah, that's a cumulative effect. I think you're probably looking at you've got your oats, your kind of lower carbonation, your 2-to-1 chloride to sulfate ratio, kind of combination things, all add up, I suppose. Would melanoidin work instead of honey malt, as it can be hard to get hold of sometimes?
Yeah, definitely. And the one thing I would say is melanoidin tends to be a touch darker again. We actually used melanoidin malt in a recent New England IPA called Gentle Chaos. And like an idiot, I do all the labels here as well. We, rather than just saying, barley, hops, as you'll see from this can, we list everything that goes in. So we'll say pale malt, wheat malt, flake oats, honey malt on the can. I forgot to put melanoidin malt on the can. So it's a relatively similar bill, pale malt, oats, wheat, and melanoidin. But the can says pale malt, oats, and wheat. So you expect that beer to be bright yellow. And it's just not, because it's 7% melanoidin. And that beer is dark. Now, we knew that the melanoidin was going to tint it. But I think a lot of people look at the can and go, why is this beer that colour when it's these malts? So you can use melanoidin. Honestly, it's perfect and it's far easier to get substitute for honey malt. And it's one thing that I agree, we have a nightmare getting the honey malt for this. Sometimes I do tend to use stupid malts. It's honey malt in this, we have Red X in our maroons, and then when those go kind of thin on the ground, it can be panic stations sometimes, So yeah, melanoidin will work. It's just again, can be a touch darker. Depends. Check the malt when you get it. It'll give you a good idea of EBC.
Hey, brilliant. Joris is saying it's a great beer. Yeah, don't miss the ABV. Paddy was asking, do you find that you need to do a diacetyl rest with the New England yeast? And did you try other yeast but find the New England added a little something extra?
No, to be honest, we went with the New England yeast from day one on this. And again, as I said, the Lallemand yeast does what it says in the tin. And it was what we were after, fruity esters, low flocculation. It seemed to work really well. And it did. It did everything we wanted it to do. Again, I'm trying WHC saturate on the latest batch. And just because I'm interested. It's also half the cost of the Lallemand yeast, which doesn't hurt, but it's it should be. Philip knows what he's doing in those labs, so I'd be interested to see what it comes out of. But no, we didn't try any other yeast. From day one, we've used Lallemand with this.
Okay, brilliant. And then a question from Keith. Then cold crashing, does that have much negative impact on the clarity of a New England style?
We crashed this beer. We do crash it. Sheets again. Actually, it's probably sitting right in front of me, is it? Talk about a crash in there. Cold crash at 5 degrees. Yeah, so we cold crash 5 degrees, 5 days, and the beer still comes out the way it looks there. So there's some things we don't do. There's no findings in this beer. We don't find it. But we do find the cold crash will, if the haze is stable, it'll hold and to take out any of that protein that you don't want in there. So it's not good like you're going to get a clear beer out. So no, but we crash it. We get it right down for packaging. Like we'll package this beer 1 degree kind of.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, keeping one eye on the clock here. I realise we're at 9 on the button. Yeah, we'll start to wrap up our teeny tiny chat there, and we're gonna bring Joe in from Ballykilcavan now in a second for Bambricks. Okay, right. Let me see now. We're gonna say hello to Joe. We'll bring him in. Are you with me, Joe?
I am indeed. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Thanks. Yourself?
Good.
Okay, cool. So, folks, as you know now, Bambricks time. Something personally I'm quite excited about, as I'm sure you know. I'm sure many of you are as well. Absolutely gorgeous beer. Big fans of it here. So, Yeah, Joe, first of all, thanks so much for coming on and having a chat about this, sharing the recipe. It's absolutely brilliant. Really, really looking forward to the chat. While people are pouring it, getting acquainted with this, which I'm sure they probably are already, why don't you, I suppose, say a quick hello yourself. Tell us, I suppose, a bit about your brewing background and then how you became head brewer at Ballykilcavan.
Yeah, well, so I'm Joe, I'm the head brewer at Ballykilcavan, as Brian has introduced me there. So I'm pretty much a little bit kind of following on the theme from Liam. There, I come from a homebrew background as well, so I kind of started off my journey with Ballykilcavan right back at the start when David, the owner, was doing some recipe developments and trying to get the recipe for a bin ballin, kind of, which was their first ever beer, down, and he approached the homebrew group that I was in to kind of, he gave us the recipe and he gave us some work and let us kind of go a bit mad on it, and from then he kind of kept tabs with me, and a few years later, when the brewery was up and running, he approached me and asked me to come on board as an innovation brewer and do a bit of sales as well. And it's ticked over from there. And this year, and I took over as head brewer when Nigel, the former brewer, retired. So I've taken over the reins this year, and we've been very busy, which is good. I haven't had much time to kind of sit on my dwell on my laurels, and it's one of them things as well. I've always been like, need to be bringing out new beer. I was always wrecking Nigel's head about, like, we need to do this, we need to do this, we need to do this, and now it's like I'm there at the reins, and I'm trying to really struggling to even to do a pilot brew to try and find enough time to even get some new beers out, because we're that busy. And you will be. I will have to apologise. I did the last time I spoke to you. I did promise you a smoked almonds Bambricks. That's going to have to wait. So. I haven't had a chance to mess around with that yet. So.
No, that was my first question. Joke. Okay. Well, first of all, like, obviously I know you're flat out and it's absolutely brilliant. So thank you so much for taking the time to chat. It's really, really appreciated. It's great. Great to have you on as always. We're going to get into, I suppose, Bambricks and brown ale in general, I suppose. What is it about this beer that you like so much, and what brings you back to it, and why do you want to keep brewing it, I suppose?
I suppose the initial spark, or the initial kind of driving force behind Bambricks was Kate, my wife. She obviously she'd been from UK. There was quite a lot of brown ales that she grew up with, and she was a fan of Nuki. And she was at me for a long time to make a brown ale, and then I eventually said, right, I'm going to make one. There was very little on the Irish market at the time to actually go and kind of get a yardstick and see which, you know, what the what was on the market. So I basically went off a lot of research online about, like, where the what kind of makes a brown ale kind of different than, say, a red ale or a mild or a lot of the English styles. And then I kind of ventured over to America to see what the Americans are doing with their brown ales, because obviously they're going to throw a lot of hops in and make them hoppy. And then I started off wanting it to be an American brown ale. So if you'll see that it's we've got SOU, SO5 in it, staff ale. So I had originally wanted it to be an American brown ale, but the more I kind of looked at the recipe, and the more I kind of the way the recipe developed, it became more apparent that it should be a malty, kind of more of a luxurious malty beer with the hops, or kind of taking like the background and backseat in this one. The reason why I like it is it's more of it's like a souped up kind of a red ale, and it's not as heavy maybe as a stout or a porter. It's drinkable, but it's also, you feel like there's nice mouth feel, there's nice silkiness to it, but there's also really decent body in it as well. the styles, it's an unheralded style, but there is a little bit of a renaissance now at the moment. Just like there's brown ales popping up all over the place, which I think myself and St. Mel's and were the ones that kicked it off and started it. So I'll take that. Our red ales our brown ales were that good that people had to try and start copying them. So
definitely.
Yeah, so like I said, it's where our lovely malts that we are so good at growing here, and with our own malts from the farm, they kind of add a little bit of the uniqueness as well. David's malts. So there's 3 of David's malts in this beer as well, which kind of makes it a little bit unique as well.
Okay, amazing, brilliant. That leads us very nicely into the recipe itself. So I'll pop it up on screen here and we'll get chatting through it. Perfect. Joe, if you're on the phone, you might not be able to see it as well. So I can chat through, or I don't know if you have it beside you. But just, I suppose, kicking off with the basics here. So we're looking at, again, about 23 litre batch. Starting off original gravity about 1054, going down to 1010, which surprised me a bit, actually. It's a kind of a drier finish than I thought it would be, or lower final gravity. Looking at about 5.8%, kind of 20 IBUs, and 65 the EBC colour. So that's it. So then I suppose jumping into the grain bill, then you touched on that there's 3 of David's types of barley or malted.
So we've our own pale malt, which basically is the backbone of water beer. So that's then we've Crystal 120, which is micro malted for us. And that's it's a hard one. We're actually running out of it, so I'm having a headache at the moment trying to find a replacement, because the masters that did it originally couldn't replicate it again, because they were only kind of starting out when we gave it to them. So the next batch they gave us is just normal crystal, and we're like, all our beers are Crystal 120. See, it's quite a dark crystal, so it's like an extra dark crystal malt. You'd be kind of looking at maybe like a Munich 3 if you're trying to buy it yourself, or a little bit darker. The Munich 3 is about 90, so you'll get away with that. Maybe Munich 3 and a bit of Special X or Special W would kind of give you the same. And then amber malt, which is basically our pale malt, and we toast it in a big massive converted smoker that we use in work. So we basically by eye watch it, and hopefully it doesn't go on fire, because we've set a few batches of Haus Party on fire before as well. So the amber's a little bit easier. We're only toasting it. So they're the 3 kind of Ballyclacavin malts in on the grain bill. The can range is always going to have, like, say, the majority of the grain bill as Ballyclacavin malts, because that's what David wants as a USP. But I'm also able to buy in some specialty malts as well, which kind of gives me a little bit more free rein in terms of kind of recipe development. So it's basically built on layers. If you're any of the homebrew guys that are listening in, when you're kind of starting, you're sitting there and you're kind of having a nucleus of a beer in your head. I always try and, so your pale malts, your base malt is your magnolia, so that's your undercoat, and then you're going to try and build your layers through that. This one's a really good one because you're not relying on any hops or anything like that, so you're just going to let the malt bill kind of sing. So what I wanted to kind of create was something that had a nice mouthfeel, and also then complementary specialty malts, which will actually, create something a bit more complex, and give the, because everyone has a different, because taste is so kind of, you pick out something different than I will, so it's all very, very personal. So if you've got different things, different layers in there, it kind of helps as well, particularly with darker beers, like and the kind of higher ABV beers. You always want a nice complex malt bill. So like the 120 is sweet, your amber then is slightly sweet as well, toasty, and then your wheat obviously just for your mouthfeel, a bit of a bodybuilder, and then the Chateau Cafe Light is your burnt toffee, and then your chocolate is for your roasty chocolate flavors that are coming through at the end, and they kind of linger. So once you build them through the malt bill, then you can almost smell it and know what it's going to taste like when you're milling it as well, which is nice.
Absolutely, yeah. It is gorgeous as you're tasting it. You know, there's layers in there. You know, it's far from one dimensional. It's absolutely beautiful. Just a comment in there from Matt as well, which is something. Yeah, so he said I probably should have known, but I never realized that so much of the malt that was produced on the farm, and it goes like you're kind of toasting it and you're roasting it yourself. Really cool, and should be advertised more. So yeah, it is great to hear. You've got your kind of three of the malts are from the farm.
Yeah, it was very cool at the start when I was like, oh, this is brilliant. And then you kind of go, David's like, yeah, can you make me an IPA? Can you make me this? Can you make me that? And I'm like, I've only got I've got Crystal 120, I've got Pale Malts, and I've got Amber and some Roast Barley. Like, what? There's only so much I can do with all those malts. Like, but it is challenging as well. It's amazing what you can come up with just with when you're just told this is all you can't actually go to the shop and buy stuff, kind of like a ready steady cook. When you can produce these different malts, but we have different malts being produced for ourselves. So eventually, we will have pretty much all our own kind of specialty malts as well. Like it's harder to get the highly kiln stuff, like, you know, your chocolates and kind of like the Chateau, Cafe Light, things like that. Like it's harder to get them from the micro malters because they don't really have the technology to get them that, you know, that color and stuff. But it's really good. It's you can always tell as well the pale malt. The pale malt has that taste that it's not as bland as some of because your pale malts you're buying off Minch or even the Hookhead series. It's a mixture of all the farms. Whereas we're getting from a field, and you do even know some years, like when we moved, say for instance, take the Long Meadow, when that's a 5.6 percent beer, but the grain bill didn't change one bit. It was just we changed over from one season, like our 2017 crop to 2018 crop, and just we had to completely adjust it because the first beer that we produced was like 4.6 or something like that. Like the exact same malts, should have been the exact same spec that came from Minch. They malted it for us, the exact same. Everything was the same. It was just completely different characteristics because it came from a different field and the other side of the farm. So
yeah, it's mad the difference it can have. And I know you're saying that, like, you could be somewhat limited, and David's saying kind of use these ingredients, but like sometimes those limitations breed extreme creativity as well. And it's, I don't know, something's working anyway. That's basically what I'm trying to say. Yeah, so then onto the hops then. Looking pretty straightforward and fairly classic as well here.
Yeah, so Magnum at the start. So you can use any kind of beer and hop as long as it's clean beer and hop. That's just for your alpha. You're just wanting to get in around the 18 to 20 IBU range just for this. So you're not going to go too mad with the hops. So just any kind of clean bitter and hop. And then Willamette is a little bit more floral. So I thought that worked nice with the malt bill and just kind of sing in the background. And then Fuggles, I'm struggling to find Fuggles at the moment. So sometimes it's Fuggles and sometimes it's EKG. I think what we're drinking at the moment more than likely has EKG in it. I've started putting Fuggles back in because I found a supplier recently. So, but I haven't actually tasted much of a difference between them.
And then our yeast we touched on before, or you touched on kind of USO5, very, very clean. Yeah,
it dries out as well. That's where you kind of seen where you saw it comes down to 10. So it's never dropped below 10. And we ferment around, I always kind of give it a little bit of a push at the higher end. So I start off around 22 until day 2 and then drop down to 20. And then once it's day about 5 or about day 5, we close off the airlock just to it's basically just to kind of try and capture some naturally occurring CO2, so we're not carbon from scratch. And then we crash down to about 4 and drop off then for about day 5 or 6. So it's a pretty quick finishing beer, no messing around with it, and it's a high yielding beer as well, which is nice.
So then, onto our brew day there. So we're saying you're mashing in 67, so you're going single infusion.
Yeah, that's just the limitation with our with our brewery. You don't have the the luxury of doing any kind of stepping, or it's just you're just straight in. So we tend to go in around between 67 and 65 for mostly all our beers, and kind of like continuing on from the team with Liam and the lads dead centre and Roger. You kind of try and you find something that works for you, particularly on the big side, and you just kind of once that you have that honed in, and you have the rest of the guys trained on that, then you kind of tend to not mess around too much, and you keep it as simple as possible. So, and once everybody in the brewery can do that and knows how to do it, then the brew day it's all about kind of making sure that the brew day runs really smoothly as well. So, it's kicking in around 60. It generally. We were going in 60, 67, and it'll drop down probably about 66 and a half to 66 by the end of the rest, and then we're just batch sparging. Then we tend to we sparge in kind of 100 litre goes until the sparges run through, and while it's transferred into kettle. But obviously the homebrew guys have an easier job than that, like particularly the same with grain powders and things like that. They lift the basket and watch it go. Like,
you jealous now?
Sometimes, yeah. When if you have a slow run off or decided to do something extravagant with a high ABV, or there's lots of something in it, like lots of oats or something, and it makes the grain. The mash quite sticky, and then you're kind of twiddling your thumbs for an hour or 2 hours watching the transfer across, while you're just seeing 50 litres at a time go into the kettle every 15 minutes. You're like, come on. But yeah, it's that's the joys of motoring, as to say.
Oh, I love it. Okay, so you're having a good brew day. It's been fairly seamless. Your kettle's filled up. So what happens next?
So we're just bringing it up to boil. We have our rousers, so we're keeping them on just to keep the work moving. And we get it up to boil fairly quickly. We've got like 3 big elements, so we generally use 2 to bring up to boil, and then boil on 1 element for the hour. We get pretty low evaporation on our kind of our system. So even if you're going in low and you think, I'll add an extra 30 minutes onto the boil to try and hit your OG, and you literally drop a pint. If you're going into the kettle in our place at 50, say what we 54. If we want to be hitting the kettle at 53, because we'll just drop that pint in the hour boil in the whirlpool, and we'll lose pretty much. I'd say, but in the hour we'll probably lose about 100 litres through evaporation. So we don't lose that much. So yeah, it's an easy brew basically. You're just literally bringing up the boil, fecking the bitter and hops, have a cup of tea, and do a bit of cleaning around the place and mash out and stuff, and then you're in with your aroma hops, which go in at, I can't see the figure, so I'm going to test myself now. I think it's 10 minutes and 5 minutes, or 5 minutes and flame out, I think.
5 and flame out, yeah.
5 minutes and flame out, and then 10 minutes you have we have our findings going. I don't know what the findings do, because they're just there. I put them in, but half the time I don't think they actually do second anything. They make a mess in the kettle. That's probably about it. But yeah, and then it's into after the hour. It's pretty straightforward. Transfer straight into the whirlpool. The whirlpool then just 15 minutes on a fast whirlpool, and then into the work chiller for another 15 minutes to preheat, and then it's off the fermenter. Then as I said, going in, probably aim to go into the fermenter about 24 and sit there. It'll cool back down to 22 by pitching. We'll be pitching at 22, and lock her up, and by the morning she's singing and dancing.
Very good. Pitch at 22. Did you keep it stable at 22? I've just found with the obviously homebrewers have the advantage because of a much smaller amount of liquid, so it's easier to heat up or cool down. So I've found, particularly in our brewery, because it was built in the 1700s, when it's cold in there, and when it's warm in there. So
it's cold inside and you've gone in a few degrees cooler, you can come in the next morning and it's down to 18 or something like that. So I like to stick at 22, gets the yeast going, and then once you see a lot of activity, then like the next day or that night you're going home after day 1 or day 2, just drop back to 20, and then it sits at 20 then. Generally with the SO4 or 5 for house yeasts, I leave them at 20. I don't mess around. I just leave them at 20 until they're finished. Anybody that uses say SO4 or Wicklow Hops company, the Bond, that just drops it in stone. You're pretty much. I think I pitched on Monday. Pitched in at 46 on the pale ale that we're doing at the moment, and today it's 12. Like, it's just crazy how quick it drops. So, yeah, that's pretty much it. Like the lad said, we try and keep things as simple as possible on the big side. Like, being an ex-home brewer, I think home brewers try to make things as complicated as possible. I was guilty of doing that as well. You have your temperatures going all over the place, and you're dry hopping at one temperature, and then you rise it up, and then dry hopping at another temperature. But we don't have that advantage sometimes, and we try and keep it as simple as possible in our place as well.
Isn't there the old adage? It's like making beer is a very simple process. It's up to the brewer to make it as complicated as possible.
Yeah, yeah, we're all guilty of that. Like,
yeah, love it. So then onto the water. Then, are you're using RO water in the brewery? Yeah. Do you?
Our water's RO, and it's pretty much clean. Like, there's nothing, and it's pretty like. It's really good, and from my point of view, because I can kind of, it's so clean as when it comes through. You're nearly on trace for a lot of the salt, so you're able to kind of go from one end of the spectrum to the other in terms of your adjustments for the water. I was looking at, because I was conflicted. I didn't want it to be like you go on. I use brewer strain, so the water profile there. You're kind of like, you've got light coloured and malty, which is what I went for in my profile. Or you've got like, you only have like some kind of London style or a Dublin dry. I didn't want it to be too dry, so I kind of customized the light coloured malty, added a little bit more chalk to it, just to kind of make it better with the dark, for it's more suited to a dark beer. Our pH when it comes through the RO from the well and the filtration, its pH is 5.8 to start with, so I don't have to do any acidification with there's no acid malt, there's no lactic acid in this, it just worked out that way. I remember when I was doing the recipe development for this, I was fighting with the salts, and I basically got them completely right, kind of all within the perimeters, and then I went to kind of go, how much lactic acid would I use? And I just looked, and it was 5.5 pH. I was like, right, I'll leave it. I don't need to touch it. And I never touched it. And I noticed that as well. A lot of the two plants they did last year, the Walnut Whip and the Pro Avery, they actually finished when I was finished doing the water adjustment on those. They were literally 5.4. So I left the pH alone as well. So I think our old water lends itself nicely to darker beers once because it just the 5.8 pH is perfect. But I've always, from the time I was homebrewing, I just went with that 5.4 is your target for pH, and then I used to just mess around a bit with just with basic chemicals or basic water adjustments, just to try and I tried to get. I would get bogged down, but tap water and even Irish water, it's not the best. So if you can get the pH right and your water tastes okay, then it's probably going to be all right for brewing with. And I'm pretty lucky as I said with the well water that's coming through.
Okay, so there's a couple of questions in I'm going to jump back to now. Before we get into them, let's say, for example, someone was brewing it this weekend. What sort of advice would you give? Is there any sort of any things to really be sure of, or any pitfalls to avoid, anything like that, or is it
Just watch your mash temperatures are always, just make sure you have your steady mash temperature and the water, your pH water. Like try and get your pH right on your water as well, because obviously water is your main ingredient. You have your, as you see there now, you've got your malts, and it's pretty much, if you can't find something, like you can't find Chateau Cafe Light, or you can't find Crystal 120, just there's plenty of apps out there. There's plenty of websites that you'll get like you'll get a sub for it pretty easily, and just kind of mess around with it. I think as I said, if you try and complicate it too much, you won't think about it. It's one of those things. If you're going at the weekend, just make sure that you got your grain bill right the night before, and you've kind of got everything planned out, and that you're not kind of rushing and kind of making mistakes. Like sanitize, and keep things simple, and just the main things to pay attention to really is your water. Make sure that's nice, clean, that you have that it tastes nice first, and then that your pH is in around 5.4, and then go for make sure your grain is milled nicely, and that you got a decent mill in the grain. It's not too like you have a nice coarse mill on the grain. Any home brewer that are out there, I'd always recommend just buy a mill, because the stuff you're buying pre-milled, it could be anything. Sometimes it's not milled best. And like at least then you have your own malts, you can mill them yourself fresh that morning, which is always an advantage.
Then I suppose, on the Chateau Cafe, you've kind of mentioned it before. I see it in the notes there as well. If someone can't get their hands on that, I see a question from Joey. He was asking, like, would Carafa or something else closest to Cafe Light, would that work, or like finding a mix of Carafa and Cara Aroma, something like those lines?
Like something like the good thing about the maltster is, like, one maltster, they're going to make that, like, and there will be several different maltsters that will actually have something fairly similar, not the exact same. So like you will find something that's in around the same characters. Like you just want something that's going to give that burnt toffee kind of like a kick to it. Like so you can't just pick a mix there. And with anything there, like, I suppose chocolate's probably the only one that because if you change that to roast barley or something, you're going to get too roasty and stuff like that. Pretty much everything else you can kind of swap out for something that you will try, and you will kind of, and you're going to end up with a nice beer as well. Like, so as long as you don't let it go too mad on the fermenting side, like, and keep it in around 20, you'll be grand. And most people can do that.
Okay, brilliant. And then final question from Stephen. As well as malts, do you grow hops too?
We do indeed, yeah. We have a little hop garden, and once a year we do. We have a fresh hop beer, so we get a band of volunteers, about 30 or 40 people down on the farm. They pick the hops for us and sort them, and then while they're doing that, we are getting the mash on, and generally by the time the hops are ready, we're pretty much ready to go in with the hops, and we basically use and pick them and use them straight away. So every year it's slightly different. So this year's fresh hop is out at the moment, and it's tasting really, really nice. Like, it's, for whatever reason, the weather this year really suited Cascade. So our Cascades, we had loads, and it's the first year that we had enough to actually have a proper Whirlpool edition. So it's quite a lot of I don't even know how much it was just whatever was left over. I threw it into hop bags and Whirlpooled it. So it'll never to be repeated, because I have no idea how much hops went in. But next year we mightn't have enough, or we might have too much. So that's the uniqueness about it. It's the same malt bill every year, pretty much based on bin ball or pale malt or pale ale, and then we go mad with the fresh hops. It just makes a mess. I'm still finding bits of hops everywhere.
Oh, amazing. I'm one eye on the clock here to see we're about bang on time. Joe, just as always, thank you so much for joining, taking the time. I know you're flat out at the moment, so again, really appreciate it. As always, it's a pleasure to have yourself and Bambrick's on. Of course, it's always great to have. So
and I do apologise for not having the new smoky Bambricks coming down the line for you, but you'll have to wait.
Something to look forward to.
Again,
No worries, Joe. We'll look forward to it next year. You promised it, so it has to happen.
It will happen. I just need I need some time to mess around smoky malts. That's what I need to do.
Nice. Thanks again, Joe. Much appreciated. I'll chat to you soon. Good luck. Bye. Okay, so now it's an absolute pleasure. We're going to be joined by John Allen from Wicklow Wolf. He's going to bring us in. He's going to talk us all through our Apex Oatmeal Stout, all about the style. But first, he's going to give us a bit of an introduction to himself and how he became head brewer at Wicklow Wolf. So, John, I'm going to pass over to you. First and foremost, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. It's an absolute pleasure to have you. Why don't you tell us a bit about your brewing background, I guess, and then how you became head brewer at Wicklow Wolf?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. And it's a pleasure to be here. It's always fun to do these things. So happy to talk about our beer, Wicklow Wolf. It's always good to see the people enjoy it. So yeah, for me, I've been head brewer at Wicklow Wolf now for about just coming up on 3 years. It'll be 3 years in January. So I started 2019, pre-pandemic days when the world was a different place altogether. And pubs existed in a normal world, but I'm here for 3 years now. I joined Wicklow Wolf just as they were building their new brewery in Newtown and Kennedy, so I would have came in just as the building was being done. So I had a chance to come in and put my stamp on the equipment and the layout and the setup of the brewery and how we were going to do all the fun things like get water connected and electricity, gas, all the things that, as you can imagine, are not easily done. But that's I've been in this site. We've converted all of our beers over from the old brewery in Bray and adapted them all to the new equipment, and then brought in a couple of new beers, changed some of the existing, and brought in some new beers. Apex being one of them, which is kind of an evolution of Black Pearl Porter, which we had brewed in Bray quite a lot and was quite well liked. We just brought up want to do something a bit bigger, a little bit more impactful, that we could kind of then also use as a platform for branching out into even bigger beers and imperial stouts. And as people are probably aware, we have a whole range of Apex-based beers, not too tightly fixed to the Apex recipe, but taking that as our starting point and inspiration, and then going on from there. Before working with Wicklow Wolf, for my pleasure or displeasure, for 6 years I was with Brewdog over in Scotland. So joined them somewhere towards the start of their rise, and got on that roller coaster for 6 years, and it was just that. It's as crazy and as hectic as you might imagine, but incredible experience. Worked with some amazing brewers, amazing people in general. It takes an awful lot of phenomenal people to really grow a business like that. So it was fantastic opportunity to have. That was not the start of my brewing career, but I started off actually in not so much brewing, but in the drinks industry with working in innovation with Diageo in just outside London. Just kind of a contract job that I got after my brewing qualification. So that was working on things like how to make Smirnoff Ice cheaper, or how to make Smirnoff Ice more consistent, or coming up with the new drinks. It was fun. There was a lot of new things, like trying to just do so much research to try to come up with lots of mad drinks and mad ideas. And you'd also be asked to come up with mad ideas and mad drinks and follow concepts. So it wasn't exactly brewing, but it was definitely interesting to see inside the development of drinks from a beast of a company like that. And again, got to work with some great people, very intelligent people, and did some interesting stuff, which was good. If I have a science background, I would use more of my science background than my brewing background, which I didn't actually have at that stage because I hadn't worked in a brewery. From there, I moved into London, and I worked with Fuller's in Chiswick for just over a year. So I split my time between the lab and then just working in the cellar, which kind of, as a junior brewer, kind of entry-level brewing job. But again, got to use my science background in the lab and learned an awful lot about the technical side of beer, and particularly how to troubleshoot beer and reverse engineer problems, and how you use analytical tools and analytical processes to find out, if you have an issue, what that issue is, and learned about, keeping tight specs on a beer and consistency and the things you need to analytically wise to be able to get that consistency and get the information you need. So that was an incredible experience, and my first real exposure to cask beer, which is, as an Irish person, is always going to be a unique experience. There's a lot of people look down in cask, but I think last 10 or 15 years, more and more people have come to appreciate it, and I definitely did when I worked there. It's a very interesting way of brewing, very interesting way of drinking beer, and Fuller's are very traditional, but did try and push the envelope a little bit. The first dry hop beer I ever really saw or was involved with was at Fuller's. No, it wasn't very heavily dry hop, but it was a little tickle of hops into the FV. But great experience to work there, and what's 300-year-old brewery, I think, or maybe even more. So it was cool. It was a good place. Then from there I went to Australia, and I worked for a company called Little Creatures, who are now bought by Line Nathan, who are owned by Asahi. And actually they now make their beer in London, weirdly. So I think it's 4Pure owned by them as well. So the beer I was making in Australia has now been made in London, from way back when. So it's funny, the circle of beer, it's quite small, and funny how things just come back around like that, both people and, instances like that. So I worked there for just about a year and a half, and it was just when they were announced that they were being bought out. I saw that Brewdog were looking for people for their new brewery in Scotland, and pretty much the exact same size of brewery and similar type setup. So I figured my experience at Little Creatures would match well with going there, and it did. It was a big help to be able to hit the ground running. And then while there, that place just exploded, and I was thrown into the deep end of many different projects and trying to figure out how to do all these strange beers, but at a large scale, which is, it's one thing putting lots of fruit or hops into a small volume of beer, but when you have to try and do the same thing on a much larger scale, and then, the logistics of it, and, if it gets up and in, it has to come out, and, it definitely was a challenge, and got to come up with some new ways of doing things and developing equipment to be able to do that. It was really interesting. As the pace is insane, but that's just Brewdog. So I worked all around the world, but never worked in Ireland, and got to know the guys here at Wicklow Wolf and saw what they were doing, and particularly when I saw the investments they were making in the equipment. Like, we have phenomenal brew house here. It's absolutely top notch. It's probably better than technology wise, better than the brew house I walked into at Brewdog, and it means we can make a lot of really great beer very consistently, and the equipment allows us to make good beer, and combined with the brewers that we have, and it gives us a lot of insight into the process, so we can make very fine adjustments and really get the best out of the beer. So adapting all of our beers from Bray to here was hard and easy. Hard in that it's very hard to move one beer from one very different type of manual brewery to a bigger brewery, but we knew that the equipment could only make the beer better. It's hard to not make a better beer. Now, it was different, but we were looking for differences. We were looking for improvements, and we were looking for the next level in all of our beers. So we redeveloped a lot of beers, and we introduced a lot of new ones like Apex, and we've kind of gone from there. Moved out into different styles as the trends and wants have changed in Ireland. And for me, I did a lot of barrel aging at Brewdog, and it was something that was really interesting, and got a lot of exposure. So it was great to be able to do that here at Wicklow Wolf, and really have that as a big focus. And we kind of started modeling ourselves to be known for our darker beers, which is something that we saw that not many breweries really do. But I have a passion for darker beers, and so do the guys here as well. So, and it's like I was saying to you earlier, it's so diverse. You can do so much with darker beers, whether it be anything from barley wines and brown ales to big imperial stouts. The selection of ingredients you can use is phenomenal. So it's great to be able to, and Apex, kind of the beer we're talking about today, that's kind of, all of our beers are kind of rooted in that beer. So when we moved here, we wanted to focus on making a really good oatmeal stout, something that wasn't just kind of an easy drinking 5% stout. We wanted something with a bit more kick to it, a bit more versatile, I think, for when you want to move up to do higher ABVs and do strange ingredients, but still very enjoyable and very pleasant. So it's been an evolution over the last 2 or 3 years with that.
Okay, so Apex then itself, you kind of touched on, you already have a bit of a love for the darker beers. I suppose the beer itself, the beer style, what would be typical of it? Like what should we be tasting? What are the kind of general characteristics of an oatmeal stout?
Yeah, so an oatmeal stout, we've kind of the ABV range can be quite broad. You can have something at a lower range around the 4-5%, no problem. We decided to go for a slightly higher ABV. It means that you're having to put more malt in. It's giving more depth of flavor and allows you to get a bit more body into the beer as well. So, and that being one of the main features of the beer is that you want it to have a soft mouthfeel, good sweetness, a good body, and we use quite a bit of oats to get that. And we're trying to, like, for people, if they're really paying attention, they might have noticed how when we first started doing the beer a few years ago versus now, it's not as bitter as it would have been or roasty as it would have been in the past. We were kind of taking Black Pearl as the base and then trying to evolve that into an oatmeal stout. So bit by bit, we're making adjustments. And what we're really looking for and what we're really happy with now is we're looking for that nice soft palate, medium bitterness, medium to low. The medium bitterness balanced nicely with the sweetness. We're kind of leaning a bit more into some of the roasted malts for the bitterness, which gives you a little bit more of a, that burnt toast type bitterness as well as the hop bitterness, but, not trying to have too much of one, trying to keep it in the middle. And then we use quite a bit of chocolate wheat, so dehusked dark malt. So again, you're not getting as much of the astringency from the malt as you would with a black malt or a coffee malt that's a husked malt. A little bit more of a softer chocolatey note. And we're using one of the more recent additions we put in to really kind of boost that caramel chocolatiness is brown malt. So slowly bringing down the roast malt a bit, and then really pumping in a bit more of the chocolate wheat, and the brown malt for us has been a great success in that it really gives it that nice kind of mocha coloured head, which I really like. I just think looks really, really appealing in in darker beers. So now we've got that soft mouthfeel, medium bitterness, good body, good sweetness, but still with that kind of a bit of a roasty bite to it that kind of cuts through that sweetness. And then for us, one of the big things in this beer is that we use, it's quite unique as well, is like we use Sriracha Ace in the Whirlpool. Now, Sriracha Ace is one of the more interesting hops out there, and sadly it's kind of dying off because it is so polarizing. It kind of goes one of two ways. So I've used it before in lighter beers, and it comes across very much like dill, or I get it as very much as dill, which isn't necessarily very pleasant in a beer. But in darker beers, it's very much lots of coconut. It's really, really nice chocolatey coconut in darker beers, and kind of really leans into the sweetness of an oatmeal stout, but then gives us a nice little twist. Like, it's kind of coconut and a little bit kind of but dark fruits as well, so it really helps to push the beer in that direction, whereas traditional stouts might have things that are maybe a little bit more herbal, a little bit more earthy, so we're trying to avoid that. We do have a bit of Bravo for just for bitterness, but it's quite a low addition, as you can see it's a 40 IBU on the recipe, which is quite low, but then there's more bitterness coming from the malt, which really kind of pumps that up. But they do balance each other nicely, as opposed to if you have a lot of roast malt, it's very astringent and dry, and we wanted to avoid that. We wanted a nice, relatively sweet beer, but not sticky and sweet like maybe like a pastry stout or something like that. Trying to hit that middle ground. Yeah, so that's what we're aiming for on our oatmeal stout. Like, again, like I said, dark beers, all the different styles there, you can push them in lots of different directions, but we're kind of going for that easier drinking, sweet, chocolatey kind of base. And then that interesting coconut kick from the Sriracha for me is I really enjoy that. I really enjoy the twist that gives. And it may be not noticeable for everyone, but I think when you explain it to people and then they try the beer, they can then, like a lot of beer flavors, if you explain to someone what flavors you're trying to get in are in there, then they'll pick up on them. It's kind of, I get that now, I get this. Or else they just lie to you and say they
It did surprise me. So Sriracha Ace it's a hop I love, and obviously it makes sense now. That's why I like the beer so much. Usually I have a pretty good detector for it. If for example in like Hope Handsome Jack, straight away I'd be like, Sriracha Ace there. Even in I think it was your Wildfire, the red, you've had it in for, like, straight away detect it. When you sent through the recipe for this, I was like, oh my God, how did I not cop there was Sriracha Ace in it? And like as soon as you said it now, I'm like, oh my God, it's there front and center. Like, I'm kicking myself. How did I not cop it?
That's it. It just blends so well with the chocolatey side of the beer and the darker. And there's so much going on in darker beers anyway. The line between the hops and the malt is far more blurred and kind of separate or expanded out, like, it's very blurred in the middle, whereas the paler the beer is, it's kind of malt and the hops. They're two very separate entities, working hand in hand, but whereas this is the two combined together, which you don't get a lot in paler beers. And then Sriracha is like, it's to be honest, before I started working with Wicklow Wolf, I was not a fan of it at all, mainly because I don't ever used it. I think there was a lager we used to do, Brewdog, that had it, and maybe a couple of pale beers. And it's just dill. It's just all dill, and I hate dill. And so when I came here and joined the guys, I told them that. I was like, I don't like Sriracha. At the time, Wildfire was called Sriracha. And actually, when I came over to talk to the guys about working here, we went out and had a bite to eat and had a couple of pints of Sriracha. And I was like, you know what? This is not the Sriracha as I've ever known it. And I'd never used it or had it in a beer like that. And it's really, I've gone a full 180 on it now. I'm a big fan of it in that style of beer. I just think it punches far above its weight, and compared to a lot of other hops. It's hard to get a hop that shines in a dark beer, and this one does. But it is like it is dying off. People, like, brewers aren't really using it anymore. There's so many different varieties coming out that it could start to become tricky to get our hands on. But there are lots of other new hops that are coming through that have that coconut side of things that we're looking for in this beer. There's lots of hops coming with that element, but instead of it being coconut and dill, it may be coconut and maybe tropical fruit, or coconut and passion fruit. It's like, a different kind, or a dark fruit. So it's leaving the dill behind. So if we do need to change in the future, I have a couple of ideas of different hops we can use to maybe even be more impactful than the Sriracha. But when we're on the day we're brewing it, like, if no one told me what's going on in the brew house, as soon as I walk in the door, it's either Apex or Wildfire, just from the smell coming off the brew house from the Sriracha. It's so pungent, and it's so distinct compared to every other hop, like, which is an interesting thing about it.
So let's see now. I'll get this. We'll share this up on screen, and we'll start to talk through. Go full screen. Can you see that? Okay, John?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
Okay, great stuff. So we've kind of adapted this for a homebrew style recipe. We're going for 23 liters. So our original gravity, you're aiming for about 1065.
Mm-hmm. We're trying, it's relatively high, and then we're trying to finish the beer relatively high, that kind of 17, 10, 17, keep that sweetness and that body in it. Tends to finish a little bit higher than that in reality, but it can get down to there. Like, so it's kind of depending on how the brew goes, like, with a malt bill as complex as that, it can vary from batch to batch in terms of how well the runoff goes and the extract you get. It's not the hardest beer we make, but it's definitely each time you do it, it can go slightly off plan, or what you think it's going to do, but kind of just the nature of the grist bill that's in it. Sure.
Well then, I suppose let's jump right into that then. So we've got, what am I looking at? 7 different grains, is it?
Yeah, and then the rice hulls.
Okay, yeah, the rice hulls there. Yeah, sorry, 3% total. So we're looking at so pale ale malt is the majority. Then we're looking at some pale chocolate, our Chateau Cafe Light, our Chateau Roasted Barley, some Cara Ruby, some brown malt, and some flaked oat malt as well. I know you touched on some of these already as we were chatting, but what's going on here? What's this kind of combination doing for the beer?
Yeah, so you can see from the malt bill here what I was saying about what we're trying to achieve in terms of get that really nice dark chocolatey flavour, not too much roast. Like the roasted barley, you will see there was 3%. It would have been double that maybe when we started, maybe even a bit more. So that's where we've dialed that back down. And so that's really the only what I would call heavy dark malt that we have in it. The pale chocolate, everything else after that is a good couple of degrees down the scale in terms of intensity with that roastiness and even the colour. But then, we're using a variety of other darker malts, from the pale chocolate to the Cara Ruby and the brown malt. So you're kind of getting chocolate, you're getting bits of caramel, you're getting biscuit as well, a bit of biscuit as well from the brown malt. So that's what gives it the depth of flavour. For me, with dark beers, you need to use a good palette of different speciality malts to give you the kind of rounded flavour and the depth of flavour that you want to have in these beers. And then we have the oat in there. It's an oatmeal stout. Can't not have the oats. But again, oats used in lots of different beer styles now, and it's great for that kind of smooth mouthfeel and a little bit of extra body as well. I've done lots of stouts with even more malts than this, and it's kind of a great thing about, for me anyway, for doing dark beers, especially the big ones, you can throw as many different malts at it as you want. You just have to be careful of the really heavy dark ones. but all these different specialty malts from the lighter to the dark, they all bring their own things to it, and it gives you just like it gives you a great complexity, and I keep saying it's complexity and depth of flavor, and which is what you want in a beer like this, And then the one thing that might maybe or maybe not a lot of homebrewers use is the rice hulls. That's purely functional. With a grist like this and with the oats, it can be quite tricky to run for the runoff. So we've got wheat. We don't have wheat. We have the flaked oat malt, and I said chocolate wheat earlier on, but I must have been mixing up. I must have meant the pale chocolate. But having a decent chunk of oat malt in there means you're going to be a bit stickier in your mash. So what we've done to remedy that in the last couple of months is just increase our liquor to grist ratio. So a bit more water in the mash at the start, and running off a little bit extra at the first works and before we start sparging. But the rice hulls, gives you that little bit of kind of a structure within the grist and within the mash when you are lautering. So there is a path for the wort to filter through. Just helps that filter through the bed, the grain bed. It still takes time. You need to just kind of nice and steady with it. But yeah, it's just an additional aid to that. But it's something that I think will help home brewers as well. We have like a lauter ton, so you have rakes and a false bottom. Most home brewers and most kind of say traditional breweries, 2 vessels will be more of a floating mash, whereas ours is an actual set bed, and we're using. We have even like a pump that starts to draw it out, so you do get a bit more of a compressed bed with our style over maybe what most home brewers would use. And also home brewers maybe aren't quite as obsessed with the time of things as we will, because we don't want to be here all day and all night, to do these beers. We have other beers to make as well. So, that's the rice hulls do help with that. And then the liquid trisulk is just a sugar, with the complex grist bill like this. Depending on how the lauter process goes, it can vary from good to bad. So the amount of extract that you get is variable as well. So we just have a little bit of sugar if we need to just get the gravity just up that last point or two. It may be a bit of a cheat, but you got so much depth of flavor in the grist bill. Adding a little bit of sugar at that stage for consistency is no. I feel there's no issue with that.
And I suppose then onto our hops. Then again, you've touched on these already, but we're looking at our Bravo for our bittering hops, and then the Sriracha Ace, as you touched on.
Like we spoke with kind of in depth about Sriracha Ace, but there's one thing that we do in this beer and most of our beers with our Whirlpool edition. So we like to have a good Whirlpool edition of most of our beers. But what we do and have been doing for a while now is going into the Whirlpool at a lower temperature. So you'll see up in the top right, I have a Whirlpool WP at 88 degrees. So usually we're between 85 and 89 degrees is the temperature in the Whirlpool. So we're bringing the temperature down, so you're getting more preservation of a lot of the flavor and aroma volatile compounds, and getting less bitterness pickup. So you're sacrificing some bitterness for conserving some of those aromas and flavors that might be lost at the higher temperature. So this is something we do with pretty much all our beers, because in the Whirlpool we're adding hops to take the heat is great for extracting the oils and getting at those flavors and compounds that are in the hops, but then it's also detrimental to their survivability in the beer, in the wort. So we go in at that lower temperature just to try and find that balance and get a bit more out of our hop charge. And it worked. Like we've been doing it for a good while now, and it makes a very noticeable difference compared to say just adding hops. And we don't dry hop this beer, but adding hops later on in the process. And dry hopping, it's a very different flavor that you're getting, and different varieties of hops act differently in both areas. But this cold Whirlpool, there's a lot of research now coming out about survivable compounds that all these nice compounds that are in hops, that are in the wort, but then do they get to the final beer, and what varieties are good to add where, which is, not so much in this beer, but definitely on the hoppier beers, we do look at that very closely in terms of what varieties we add where, and what combinations we use. So we're going into the Whirlpool after an hour's boil. We do that first hop charge at the start of the boil, the Bravo, just to give us our base bitterness, nothing else for the rest of it. And then for the Whirlpool, it's Sriracha Ace at that cold temperature. And then, so Whirlpool for 20 minutes, then we cast out at 19 degrees to the FV. and for pitching, we use LAX from Wicklow Hops Company. Great yeast. We substituted that for USO5 quite a while ago, and they're literally around the corner from the brewery. I mean, like literally around the corner. So it's like we regularly will start brewing, go, we don't have enough yeast, and text Philip and go, Philip, can you get yeast to us in the next 3 hours? And he's like, yeah, no problem. So we get very lazy with ordering, but it's great to have those guys around the corner.
Handy.
That's it. Yeah. And that's it. Like once it's into the tank, we don't do anything else. We just ferment it out. It'll usually take 5, 6, 7 days. Give it a little bit longer. Just make sure any diet is mopped up and cleared up, and we'll then just drop the temperature right down to 0 or -1.
Okay, brilliant. You touched on it there on the yeast as well. So LAX, that's similar to like USO5 or 1056, kind of a clean fermenting West Coast kind of ale yeast. Yeah, okay, perfect. Yeah, so if anyone's looking for some sort of substitute, but that's it. Just something that's kind of middle of the road, doesn't really pack a massive ester punch. It's very reliable, very dependable, and it allows the ingredients in the work to shine through. And then, yes, fermenting to within 0.02 of final gravity.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, we're usually either at between 16 and 18. Yeah, at the end, and that's pretty consistent. Usually, maybe a little bit on the higher 17, 18, but it can vary. But yeah, it gives you enough sweetness and body left in the beer to help balance out some of the more roasty flavors and give us that smooth mouthfeel.
Okay, brilliant. Then just one thing I suppose to touch on then. Let's say you're going in on the morning of a brew day. It's time to go through your mashing schedule. So we've got 4 steps here. So what's going on here, I suppose, at each stage? And So we've got quite a complex grist bill. So we want to make sure that we're actually able to run it off, and we want to get the extract that we want to get from the beer. So we're mashing in quite low, so we can have some enzymes working on the proteins, kind of make the mash a little bit less gummy and sticky. And then we want to get good extract from the beer. From experience, I know that these heavier grist bills like this, your extract efficiency is not going to be quite as good. So you're kind of trying to give yourself as much of a chance as you can to break down the sugars and really be able to get at them and get them out into the work. So you end up with a decent starting gravity in the kettle. So we go through, it may be a little bit overkill with the mash regime that we have, but we have the ability to do it and to do it very easily. So I wouldn't be obsessive about this from a homebrewer's point of view, but I would start relatively low. If you have the ability to adjust temperature, I would start at that 54, just to give yourself a chance to really break down the more gummy side of the grist bill and makes life a little bit easier. And get at the extract that's in the grain. But it doesn't need to be on a homebrew scale. It wouldn't need to be as intensive as this. For us, we could probably simplify this a little bit more, but if it's not broke, don't fix it. Yeah, it's good mantra.
That's it.
Yeah. And then so you're going through your steps. So you have 10 minutes at 54, then you're hitting about half an hour at 62, another 10 at 68, and then 15 at 72.
Yeah. So we would mash up. We would do our iodine test at 72, and then after the 72, we bring it up to 76, just for mashing off and into the lauter ton, and just trying to get the temperature up a little bit, kill off some of the enzyme activity, and then also with the viscosity of the mash from the amount of extract we have in. That higher temperature means it's just a little bit less dense, and it helps with the runoff.
Then, one thing stuck out for me as well. It's an 85-minute boil on this one.
Mm-hmm. So it's one thing actually I should have maybe adjusted for this, is that the kettle that we have, it doesn't boil the whole way through. So it has a couple of different steps where it'll boil, say, for 15 minutes and then stop. But as it's doing that, it's still recirculating through the vessel. We have like a deflection plate, so it recirculates down on that and creates a fan. So it's really good for DMS evaporation and getting DMS out of the beer. But it means you're doing that but not having to pump in more gas and more heat. So it's kind of like an energy saving efficiency where your wort is hot enough that you're getting the evaporation that you need to really blow up that DMS, but you're not having to keep pumping in steam, So we have got a couple of breaks like that, which kind of extends the boil out by those extra 15 minutes or so. And we are maybe a little bit more than we normally would be. We go for let's say it's 70 minutes of boiling altogether when we have these steps in between where this is happening. It's purely just an efficiency thing on our front with the equipment that we have. I never thought of that though in terms of for a homebrew setup. Just keep boiling it. If you're homebrew, just don't stop and start and stop. Just boil it.
Very good. So for anyone brewing this at home, then any boil time between 60, 75 minutes should be spot on, and they can adjust their kind of water as they need. That's it.
It's kind of most people homebrewing, they know what works for them in terms of how long they need to boil to get maybe the extract, the evaporation that they need. But anyway, and again, like we have the hop charge at the start. We don't have a late hop addition, so there's nothing really to worry about there at the end. So it's kind of system specific to kind of get what you think you need, do what you need to do to get to hit the specifications that we have here. Yeah, and then the water profile. Again, everyone has their own their own water that they're dealing with. We're quite lucky where we are in Wicklow. The water is very soft, quite low mineral content, so we run through a carbon filter. And then we add back whatever salts we want to get. So in this case, we add back the salts to hit this water profile that we're trying to achieve. And you can see it's quite, we're kind of leaning more towards the chloride side slightly. But it's pretty balanced between sulfate and chlorides. But what we are adding is bicarbonate, and that's just kind of to maybe bring the pH up a little bit to balance the acidity from a lot of the darker malts that we have. So you can end up with the pH being quite low, and then your final beer can be just that little bit more accurate as a result. So we just a bit of bicarb to kind of bring that pH back up, but not having to sacrifice anything on the malt front. So you could do it malt wise, but it means you might have to play around or lose some of that complexity that you have in the malt bill. Whereas we kind of use a little bit of sodium bicarb to do that, and try and hit the pH of 5.2 is what we're looking for, around 5.2 to 5.3 when casting out.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much us taken through the recipe in full detail. So yeah, thank you so much. That's absolutely brilliant. It's a gorgeous beer. Like as I keep saying, it's absolutely stunning, and it's something that I'd love to have a bash of brewing here myself. So I might give it a go now as my next brew.
Thank you.
I suppose then just any final kind of tips. I suppose if anyone was to be, let's say they're brewing it this weekend or over Christmas or whenever, anything for them to any pitfalls to avoid or any tips to help them brew it.
It's one of those beers that's kind of, you're at the mercy of the mash. So if a lot of brewers don't have homebrewers maybe don't have a way of adjusting the grind on their malt. A lot of specialty malts can end up being ground into a powder, which then it makes it very hard with the lautering. It also makes it a little bit more astringent. So it's something to watch. If you can't control it, great. It's a good thing is not to maybe what I've done, not specifically for this beer, but maybe for a lot of beers in the past, if that's a worry, make sure mill or pale malt on one setting, and then maybe loosen out the grind a little bit, just for the really dark malts like the brown malts and things that are the roasted malts and chocolate malts, because they can shatter a little bit when you're milling and get ground up a little bit, just to try and avoid that astringency. And then I would recommend for any home brewers that haven't tried it before is the cold whirlpool. We found a big difference. Not so much that it's like you get an insane amount more hop flavor. Again, it's a different type. It's different type of flavor or profiles that you're getting from dry hops or you're getting from traditional whirlpool or bittering. So again, it adds into the depth of flavor in any beer, especially with hop forward beers. It really gives you a good kind of depth of flavor. But in this case, with using the sriracha, it really allows that kind of the coconut side of that hop to shine through.
Okay, amazing. Yeah, I think we'll start to wrap it up there. I just want to say again, John, thank you so much for joining in. Thanks for being so open, sharing the recipe.
Oh, no
thanks for brewing such an incredible beer. It's absolutely gorgeous.
I'll stop.
One thing I didn't know about your background before, as you were saying at the start, is that you worked on the innovation side in the drinks industry, and then you worked in kind of like quality control and obviously brewing throughout. And I think all those things coming together, I think it makes a lot of sense how you're a perfect fit for Wicklow Wolf, and what they're releasing at the moment is just makes a lot of sense. You're putting so many extremely high quality brews out, very innovative thinking, different styles, and it's absolutely brilliant. So just again, thank you so much. It's an absolute pleasure to have you.
Oh no, it was a pleasure to finally make it on. These things are always fun. You don't get to do as much of talking to people about beer as we used to with the pandemic and going to festivals. So it's great. Great to be able to share, what we're doing here at Wicklow Wolf, and we have a tap room here at the brewery now that's open, and tours that people can come down and see the facility firsthand and have a few fresh beers on tap. So it's great to get the customers as close to the process and the people that make the beers possible. I think you can really get an appreciation for the effort that us and every other brewer puts into the beers that they're making. It's a huge effort. A good effort is enjoyable, but it's good to have people not underestimate the amount of effort it is to make consistently good beer. And just there's so much of it now in Ireland, especially far more than when I started brewing many moons ago. Not that there weren't great brewers, just there wasn't so much choice, and now the standard of art in Ireland is through the roof. It's phenomenal. It's great to see. As a brewer, it's great to come back to Ireland and see so many breweries doing so many amazing different beers and styles, and doing them really well and consistently.
That's it. Here. I couldn't agree anymore. That's an absolutely perfect and fitting way to sign off. So again, thank you so much, John. Cheers, and we'll chat soon.
Take care.